I argue that even before Filipinos are recruited, marketed, and deployed overseas, Philippine colleges and universities deliberately work to educate students for export. In the Philippine higher education system, attempts to produce employable migrant workers has meant rapidly changing what academic programs are available, what courses are taught, and even how building space is allocated, just to offer the degrees that supposedly address foreign labor needs. So what might this look like? Here I have a screenshot from the website of a large private university in Manila. Here the university is promoting its most popular majors. So the university chose to advertise these majors because all of them are associated with a type of profession that is supposedly in demand. So it is important to note that 88% of the country's 1,943 colleges and universities are private. They're privately owned, and they depend completely on student tuition. As such, school owners and administrators rely on academic programs that are popular among families, anxious to ensure their children's future career prospects. Yet, the largest academic programs with the most massive student bodies are majors associated with overseas demands, degrees that supposedly offer the best chance of leaving the country. Nursing, seafaring, and most recently, hotel and restaurant management. So these are jobs where Filipino migrant workers are highly represented. But in the Philippines, this practice is state-supported and it dominates the higher education system. So as noted by our former Secretary of the Department of Education, Brother Andrew Gonzalez, he says, instead of bemoaning brain drain, we should recognize that at present, our manpower services have become an export for the country. And we must systematically look for markets for our overseas foreign workers and take systematic means to prepare them to do well in other countries. So this goes against the assumption that migration is caused by simply a lack of jobs in the Philippines. Actually, what's happening is people choose to go overseas and then they look for the major that would help them fulfill this dream. So it's something that happens much earlier. I mean, this emphasis on education for export simply echoes a global ideology of human capital development, promoting the idea that the economic progress of modern nations relies on the ability of citizens to develop their own skills. And if that sounds familiar, it's because it's the very same ideology on which Singapore nationhood is built. The assumption is that having an educated citizenry will attract multinational companies and investors to come to your country. Human beings are a nation's most valuable resource. But in the Philippine case, this argument is kind of turned on its head. If migrant workers are our country's most valuable resource, then higher education must provide them with the best training for them to leave. In this sense, higher education in the Philippines has come to be about learning to leave, where educators must teach graduates to become productive workers in other countries. So in the outside world, that's brain drain, but in the Philippines, that's called effective labor export supply response. So how well do Philippine colleges and universities actually fulfill this role as producers of future migrant workers? And what are some problems that result from attempts to do so? What does it mean to make Filipino graduates employable to foreign employers? And what are the costs of prioritizing global needs in local classrooms? I argue that there are two main problems. First, in line with Nicola Yates' theory of the migrant labor commodity chain, I find that Filipino owners and administrators relied heavily on strategies of global production, meaning they tried to act like factories, imposing this notion of flexibility where they quickly shifted institutional resources and manpower to produce the right types of graduates at the right time. So in the case of nursing, studies have projected a need for 1 million new nurses in the US by 2020. But I found that there is also a demand for degrees among young people who want to fulfill their migration aspirations. And this demand is fueled by a range of sources, which are not always reliable, advice from relatives overseas, government contacts, job statistics, relationships with potential employers, the news. So in this chart, you see these two types of demand playing out within Philippine universities and colleges. In orange, you see the number of nurses who actually were deployed from the Philippines. And you can see the numbers, it's quite far. So in the mid-2000s, there was this steep decline in the number of students entering nursing. And this was due to many factors: retrogression in the US Embassy, the oversupply of nursing graduates, and the global financial crisis. Then in the mid-2000s, Word spread that hotels and resorts in Singapore and the Middle East were looking for overseas workers. So you see that as nursing declined, enrollment in HRM, hotel and restaurant management, rose very quickly, prompting school owners to rapidly shift resources and convert physical spaces in an attempt to be flexible to an unpredictable labor market. So my book argues that the task of actually educating employable graduates is not a simple process of manufacturing products the way a factory makes material goods. While school owners and state officials tried to espouse this model of flexible production, such efforts fell short and led to problems that even the Philippine state failed to anticipate. College faculty faced heightened job insecurity, threats to professional values and standards, and the haphazard restructuring of university spaces. So just to give you an idea, in one university I visited, administrators cut faculty numbers from 348 faculty members, educators, to 16. And that was because enrollment had dropped from 10,000 plus students to 230. So my research argues that in many ways, school owners and administrators failed to achieve their ideals of flexibility and efficiency. Then Filipino students and their parents, while also complicit in using education to achieve their migration dreams, were actually the main victims of this export-oriented education system. The lack of government regulation encouraged the overexpansion of particular programs, leading to an oversupply of graduates within these fields. And this was especially the case of nursing graduates who were unable to leave the country when opportunities for migrant nurses declined after 2008. So in the end, my book asks, what is the purpose of higher education in this globalizing world? And what is lost in our quest to prepare students for an unstable market? At the time I was doing research for this book, monsoon rains brought massive flooding to the city of Manila. An earthquake 32 times stronger than the Hiroshima bomb struck major cities in the Visayas region, and a super typhoon called Yolanda claimed more than 6,000 lives in the southern province of Samar. As each of these events unfolded, universities and colleges served as key sites for mobilization. Faculty and students rallied around, surrounding communities to organize for civic action, either in the form of disaster relief or political protest. And universities also served as an important venue for people to continue questioning and debating social issues. The public role of higher education is absent in the current talk surrounding emigration, employability, and economic returns. In many ways, the drive to produce future migrant workers, while flawed and problematic, is a powerful goal, and it just undermines the other ways that colleges and universities produce the heroes that work for the betterment of society. It is important to note that export-oriented education is likely to spread to other contexts. As more countries begin to use emigration, or more particularly remittances, as a development strategy, more people are starting to take on the Philippines as a model for labor export. In recent years, Vietnam, Indonesia, and China have begun to explore this idea of producing skilled professionals for overseas work, so basically following the same model. And therefore, all of this will raise more questions as to what is the meaning of schools in a globalized world.
About 15 years ago, I was on a consultancy project with the Ministry of Manpower Singapore. At that time, there was a downturn, and for the first time, the casualties, the highest unemployment was among the professional, managerial, and technical. So the professionals were being hit for the first time in larger numbers, because in the past, it was really semi-skilled workers. So they were in a quandary. And one of the things that came out from that project, and this is really from a Singaporean perspective, right? So I'm a Singaporean trying to understand your book. And the way I can understand it is by telling you this story. So one of the things that they were trying to figure out was, why aren't Singaporean workers going overseas? They're not going. In fact, getting them to change industry is a challenge. So when I saw this book, I said, what is going on? So it's not really just about the university. It's not really just about the students. It's about the whole of society.
So you are arguing in your book that Filipino higher education institutions adopt this highly flexible model of operation in relation to their programming, curriculum design, faculty deployment, and management of campus infrastructure and space in order to meet the fluctuating labor demand or perceived labor demand in Western emigration destination countries. So I mean, under this sort of a neoliberalization framework of higher education, there is this there's a double commodification. There's the commodification of education itself, which is your program. Then the students are supposed to buy it like a private good. They are supposed to pay for it. Then there is also the commodification of students, right? Students are like, marketable products with marketable skills that are churned out onto the market, and then the employers are supposed to pay for them, like in the bidding process. I think it would be interesting to think about what are the possible implications of this neoliberalization, even for more privileged and more sort of public institutions of more of a public character, such as those ones in Singapore, right? Are we totally exempt from this neoliberalization imperative, in some sense? If it is very narrowly defined in terms as those that have immediately translatability in the labor market, such as more engineering, science, or commerce-related skills, then I think the one possible downside or implication of this is, knowledge that in disciplines such as humanities and social sciences, right, the kind of skills that we, basically three of us, right, sociologists, we have, or which does not have immediate market translatability and applicability, may be further marginalized. If you look at our how readily our institutions make changes to their programs and our set up research centers, new funding schemes, and so on in response to globally relevant trends and emerging discourse about what is the next new thing, frontier of employability and so on. I think our universities are incredibly flexible already in many sense. In the Filipino case, right, the universities are responding to fluctuating demands in Western countries, and that results in a lot of negative consequences. Whereas in Singapore, our universities are being flexible or are doing things to meet a more abstract criteria of employability that is defined in a sort of borderless sense, right? We are preparing our graduates for a world of limitless opportunity out there.